The hidden security camera captured every single word while I lay paralyzed on my father's Persian rug during their anniversary gala, and he told the whole room, "Leave her down in the cellar. If she freezes, it's a tragedy." I woke up staring at the sterile ceiling tiles of Westchester Medical Center, with no memory of how I got there. The digital clock on the wall read 3:14 a.m. The numbers were blindingly red in the dim room. There was a steady, rhythmic beeping coming from the monitors taped to my chest, and a deep, aching cold settled directly in my bones. My mouth tasted like copper and ash. My mother sat in the corner chair. She was still wearing her midnight blue silk evening gown, though she had draped a cashmere shawl over her shoulders. She was clutching a designer handbag in her lap, her knuckles white. When she saw my eyes open, she leaned forward with a tight, perfectly practiced smile. "You wandered out into the snow, sweetie," she cooed. Her voice was entirely steady. "You had way too much champagne at the party." I stared at her. I have been severely allergic to alcohol since I was a teenager. One sip sends me into rapid anaphylaxis. My throat closes. My skin breaks out in hives. She knew this. She was the one who rushed me to the emergency room when I was 14 after I accidentally drank spiked punch at a New Year's party. Before I could form the words to respond, the door pushed open. The night nurse walked in to adjust my IV drip. She was young, her name tag reading Luz's in block letters. Luz kept her eyes glued to the plastic tubing, deliberately avoiding my mother's gaze. The tension in the room was suffocating. My mother's phone buzzed in her handbag. She sighed, an exaggerated sound of maternal exhaustion, and stood up. "I need to take this. It's your father. He's been beside himself with worry." She smoothed the front of her gown and stepped out into the hallway, the heavy wooden door clicking shut behind her. Luz immediately stopped adjusting the IV. She looked over her shoulder at the closed door, then leaned down close to my ear. "Your family was remarkably eager to sign a do not resuscitate order," she whispered, her breath warm against my freezing skin. "The doctor refused because of your age, but your father had his lawyers on the phone trying to push it through. Don't eat or drink anything they bring you." Luz squeezed my hand once, hard, and hurried out of the room before I could ask her anything. My iPad sat untouched on the rolling tray table next to my bed. My mother must have grabbed it from my apartment when they packed my overnight bag to make this look like a standard hospital stay. My fingers were stiff and uncoordinated, but I managed to reach over and pull the tablet onto my lap. The screen cast a pale blue glow over my hospital gown. I opened it and accessed the cloud dashboard for my parents' Greenwich estate. I had installed discrete indoor Nest cameras last Christmas to monitor the cleaning staff after my mother complained about missing silverware. They barely knew how to use the app, let alone realize the cameras recorded audio directly to a remote server I controlled. I filtered the timeline. I pulled up the primary archive from 9:30 p.m. The footage loaded, showing the mahogany-lined study on the second floor. Downstairs, the muffled bass of a jazz band vibrated through the floorboards. It sounded like a heartbeat. My 22-year-old cousin Maya was pacing frantically in the corner by the bookshelves, chewing her fingernails to the quick. She looked terrified in her silver bridesmaid-style dress. Then, I watched myself walk into the frame holding a stack of manila folders. "Dad, Uncle Richard, we need to talk," my recorded voice said. I sounded terrifyingly calm. "Not right now, Alina," my father dismissed. He was standing by the mirror adjusting his tuxedo boatie. He didn't even look at me. "The caterers are waiting for the toast. Maya is facing a federal indictment on Tuesday for the $4 million you and Richard siphoned from the company," I stated on the video. The room on the screen went entirely still. The jazz music downstairs suddenly felt deafening against the heavy silence. My Uncle Richard stepped aggressively into the frame, his face flushing a dark, violent red. "She signed the Shell Corporation documents as the primary director," Richard spat. "You forged her signature while she was locked in the inpatient facility," I yelled, slamming the folders onto the heavy oak desk. "I found the metadata on the PDF files. It traces directly back to your personal IP address, Richard. I have the drive." Nobody spoke for an agonizing minute. On the screen, Maya was quietly hyperventilating, her hands pressed over her mouth. Then, my father sighed heavily. He walked over to the wet bar. He poured me a glass of sparkling water from his crystal pitcher, dropped in a single slice of lemon, and handed it to me. "You're getting worked up over nothing," my father said, his voice dropping into that soothing, reasonable tone he used when negotiating corporate mergers. "Drink this, calm down, and we will figure this out together. No one is going to prison." I watched myself take the glass. I watched myself drink the water. Less than 3 minutes later, my knees buckled. "I can't feel my hands," I mumbled. I collapsed forward, hitting the edge of the mahogany desk with my hip before crashing down to the Persian rug. Total chaos erupted on the screen. Maya shrieked and rushed toward my body, dropping to her knees. "What did you give her? We have to call an ambulance." "Shut up," Richard roared. He grabbed Maya harshly by the shoulders and shoved her backward so violently she slammed into the leather sofa. My father didn't flinch. He walked around the desk and stared down at my limp, twitching body. His expression was completely void of humanity. I watched him look at his own daughter the way a man looks at a flat tire. "Take her down to the wine cellar," he instructed coldly. "Drop the climate control to 32 degrees and jam the electronic lock. She will freeze to death down there." Maya screamed, sobbing hysterically now, crawling backward on the floor. She got heavily intoxicated, wandered downstairs, and accidentally locked herself in, my mother said smoothly, stepping into the frame. She walked carefully over my legs to avoid getting dust on her heels. "It will be a tragic accident. Elena has always been troubled." For the next 15 minutes, I sat frozen in my hospital bed, the monitors beeping steadily in the quiet room, and watched my family haul my dead weight down the stairs. I watched Richard grab me under the arms. I watched my father take my ankles. They spent another 10 minutes in the cellar arranging broken wine bottles around my unconscious body. "Tear her dress a little," my mother instructed from off camera. "Make her look completely unhinged, like she was thrashing around." ground. I watched Richard's hands rip the silk of my dress down the side. "This is murder," Maya choked out from the top of the stairs. A sickening smack echoed through the audio feed. It was sharp and loud. On the camera, Maya's head snapped to the side. "You take the fall for the money, she takes the fall for the bottle," Richard snarled, standing over her. "Memorize the story right now, or you're next." I closed the iPad. My hands were trembling so violently the tablet clattered onto the plastic tray table. I couldn't catch my breath. The air in the hospital room felt thin, useless. My family had orchestrated my death to protect a stolen fortune, treating my body like a disposable stage prop. They were going to let me freeze on a concrete floor while they drank champagne upstairs. I didn't call the police right away. If I called the police, my father's lawyers would be here in 10 minutes. They owned the local precinct. They played golf with the chief of police. I needed to know if Maya was safe first. I needed to know if she was still alive. I picked up my phone from the bedside table. I opened my messages and texted her, "I know about the LLC and what they did to me. Meet me." 10 agonizing minutes passed. I watched the 3 gray typing dots appear and disappear, appear and disappear. Then, my phone rang. Maya's name flashed on the screen. I answered it immediately, pressing the phone tight against my ear. "Maya?" I whispered. "I'm so glad you're awake, Elena." Maya's voice came through the speaker. It was hollow, flat, and entirely robotic. She sounded like she was reading from a cue card. "We were all so worried when you started drinking again last night." "Maya, stop," I said, my voice cracking. "I have the footage. I saw what Richard did to you. I saw them drag me down the stairs. You don't have to lie. I'm going to get us out of this." There was a long pause. I could hear the faint sound of traffic in the background on her end. "She wasn't at the estate." "I don't know what you're talking about, Elena," Maya said. The deadness in her tone was terrifying. "You got drunk. You fell. Uncle Arthur has already arranged for your transfer to the psychiatric facility in New Canaan. The transport van will be there by 6 in the morning. You just need to rest and accept the help." "Maya, please, I have to go. The lawyers are here to prep me for the audit." The line went dead. I lowered the phone to my lap. The psychiatric facility in New Canaan. It was a private, high-security luxury rehab where my father sat on the board of directors. If they put me in a transport van, I would never come out. They would keep me heavily sedated, declared mentally unfit, a tragic heir who lost her mind to addiction. The perfect cover for why I was rambling about stolen millions and attempted murder. I looked at the clock. 4:12 a.m. I had less than 2 hours. I ripped the tape off the back of my hand and pulled the IV needle out. A line of warm blood trickled down my knuckles, dripping onto the pristine white hospital sheets. I ignored it. I swung my legs over the side of the bed. The cold floor shocked my bare feet. I stood up, and the room tilted violently. Whatever sedative my father had slipped into that water was still working its way through my bloodstream. I grabbed the edge of the tray table to steady myself. My overnight bag was sitting in the open closet. I stumbled over to it and unzipped it. My mother had packed it exactly the way she wanted the world to perceive me. Faded, oversized sweatpants, a stained college hoodie, no bra, no socks, just a pair of cheap plastic flip-flops. She wanted me to look like a mess when the orderlies dragged me out of here. I stripped off the hospital gown and pulled the clothes on. I grabbed my phone, the iPad, and my wallet, shoving them into the deep pockets of the hoodie. I cracked the door open. The hallway was quiet. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. My mother was sitting in a waiting area at the far end of the corridor, her back to me, talking animatedly on her cell phone. She was gesturing with her free hand, probably negotiating the terms of my committal. The nurse's station was directly between me and the stairwell. Luz was sitting behind the curved counter, typing on a computer. I stepped out of the room, keeping my back pressed against the wall. I moved as quietly as I could, the plastic flip-flops smacking softly against my heels. When I reached the station, Luz looked up. Our eyes met. She looked at my street clothes. She looked at the blood drying on my hand. She looked down the hall toward my mother. Luz reached out and smoothly pulled a stack of patient charts directly in front of her face, entirely blocking her own line of sight. I didn't hesitate. I slipped past the desk, pushed through the heavy fire doors of the stairwell, and began the 6-story descent. My thighs burned. My head spun with every turn of the concrete steps. By the time I hit the ground floor and pushed out the side exit into the freezing December air, I was gasping for breath. The cold hit me like a physical blow. It was 28 degrees outside. Snow was piled high in the hospital parking lot, the yellow street lamps reflecting off the ice. I had no coat. I pulled the hood up and walked as fast as I could toward the main road, the thin plastic of the flip-flops offering zero protection against the frozen pavement. I walked for 3 miles before I found a 24-hour CVS in a strip mall. The sliding doors parted, and a blast of artificial heat washed over me. The cashier, an older man reading a paperback behind the counter, barely glanced at me as I walked toward the back of the store. I grabbed a pair of cheap fleece gloves, a knit hat, a bottle of water, and a prepaid burner phone. I walked up to the register. I pulled out my primary credit card, the one linked to my personal checking account, not the family trust. I slid it into the chip reader. Declined. Please contact issuer. I frowned. I had over $60,000 in that account. I pulled out my secondary card and inserted it. Declined. Account frozen. The cashier sighed and lowered his book. "You want to try another one, miss?" Panic flared in my chest, hot and sharp. I opened the banking app on my phone. The screen loaded, displaying my balances. Every single account read 0. A red banner across the top of the app stated, "Account locked due to suspected fraudulent activity. Please contact your branch manager." They hadn't just tried to kill me. They had dismantled my entire life while I was unconscious. My father's CFO, a man who had known me since I was 6 years old, must have initiated a freeze the moment the ambulance pulled out of the estate driveway. They knew if I survived the night, I would run. They were cutting off my legs. I had $42 in cash in my wallet. I handed a 20 to the cashier, grabbed the fleece gloves, and walked back out into the cold. I sat on a concrete parking block behind the CVs, hidden from the street by a row of industrial industrial dumpsters. The wind bit through my hoodie. I put on the gloves, my fingers shaking so badly I could barely pull the fabric over my knuckles. I had no money. I had nowhere to sleep. If I went to my apartment in the city, they would be waiting for me. If I went to the police, my father would have me institutionalized before the detective even finished taking my statement. There was only one person outside the family who knew the intricate architecture of my father's corporate holdings. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the bottom of my contacts. I tapped the name Arlo Locke. Arlo was a junior associate at the corporate firm that handled my family's mergers. We had dated briefly 3 years ago. A quiet, unremarkable relationship that ended when he realized my father would never promote him if he was sleeping with his daughter. Arlo was ambitious, but he wasn't cruel. More importantly, he was the one who had accidentally left the encrypted drive on my dining table last month, the drive that led me to the forged LLC documents in the first place. I dialed his number. It rang 5 times. I was about to hang up when the line clicked open. Hello? Arlo's voice was thick with sleep. Arlo, it's Elena. I heard the rustle of sheets. Elena, it's 5 in the morning. Are you okay? I saw an email from your dad's assistant a few hours ago saying you were in the hospital. I'm not in the hospital, I said, my teeth chattering. I left. Arlo, I need you to meet me. Meet you? Where? Elena, what's going on? The LLC documents I found on your drive, I said. The ones for Maya. I confronted my dad about them tonight. There was a dead silence on the line. The kind of silence that tells you the person on the other end is suddenly wide awake. You did what? Arlo hissed. Elena, I told you never to mention you saw those. You swore to me you wouldn't. They tried to kill me, Arlo. My dad poisoned me and locked me in the wine cellar to freeze. I have it on camera, but they locked my accounts. I have nothing. I need a place to figure this out before the transport van comes to take me to New Canaan. New Canaan? Arlo's voice cracked. Jesus Christ. Elena, where are you right now? Behind the CVs on Route 9. Don't move. Give me 20 minutes. He hung up. I sat in the freezing dark, staring at the frost forming on the edges of the dumpster. The minutes dragged by in agonizingly slow increments. Every time a pair of headlights swept across the parking lot, I pressed myself flat against the brick wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. I kept expecting to see my father's black Mercedes SUV, or a private ambulance with 2 orderlies carrying a straitjacket. 25 minutes later, a silver Honda Civic pulled into the lot. It idled near the dumpsters. I stood up and walked cautiously toward the passenger side. Arlo leaned over and pushed the door open. I slid into the heated car. It smelled like stale coffee and dry cleaning fluid. Arlo looked terrified. He was wearing jeans and a wrinkled button-down shirt, his hair sticking up in the back. He didn't look at me. He kept his eyes locked on the rearview mirror. Put your seatbelt on, he said tightly, shifting the car into drive. Thank you, Arlo. I know this is a risk. You don't understand anything, he interrupted, pulling out of the parking lot and accelerating down the empty highway. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. You think you found a smoking gun with Maya's signature. You think that's the whole story. It's $2.4 million, I said. It's federal wire fraud. Arlo let out a harsh, bitter laugh. Elena, $2.4 million is a rounding error to your father. He wouldn't kill you over that. He wouldn't even lose sleep over that. I stared at the side of his face. The dashboard lights cast deep shadows under his eyes. Then what is it? Arlo swallowed hard. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a thick white envelope and tossed it into my lap. It felt heavy. I opened the flap. Inside were stacks of $100 bills. $10,000, at least. There's cash, Arlo said, his voice trembling slightly. There's a prepaid burner in the glove compartment. I booked you a motel room under a fake name in Poughkeepsie. You need to get out of the state by tomorrow. Arlo, why? He finally turned to look at me. His eyes were wide with genuine fear. Because Maya isn't the only one they set up, he whispered. That LLC wasn't just siphoning money. It was buying up distressed real estate in the city. Properties that burned down 2 weeks after they were purchased. Insurance payouts in the tens of millions. The $2.4 million was just the seed money to start the fires. My blood ran completely cold. Arson? 5 buildings. Elena, 7 people died in the last fire in Queens. Arlo looked back at the road, his jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might snap. And Maya didn't sign as the primary director. She signed as the secondary. The pieces fell into place with a sickening, heavy thud. I looked down at my hands. They were still shaking. Who is the primary? I asked, though I already knew the answer. You are, Arlo said. Your father didn't just forge Maya's signature. He forged yours. The federal indictment isn't coming for Maya on Tuesday. It's coming for you. I stared at the glowing green numbers on the dashboard clock. 5:14 a.m. The heater was blasting against my shins, but I couldn't stop shivering. I pulled the fleece gloves off and pressed my bare palms against my eyes, trying to block out the reality of the highway rushing past us. 7 people, I said. My voice didn't even sound like my own. It sounded thin and hollow, like paper tearing. 2 families in a tenement in Astoria, Arlo said, keeping his eyes glued to the road. An elderly couple in a rent-controlled brownstone in Brooklyn. They bought the buildings through the LLC, bumped up the insurance premiums to the maximum threshold, and a month later, faulty wiring sparks a 5-alarm fire. The properties are cleared, the tenants are gone, the insurance pays out $20 million, and the land is suddenly primed for luxury development. And my name is on the deeds. Your name, your social security number, your digital signature, Arlo confirmed. Your father's it guy, that guy Stellan from the London office, he routed all the IP addresses through a server in your apartment. If the feds trace the digital paper trail, it leads directly to your home Wi-Fi. I leaned my head against the cold passenger window. The nausea was rising in my throat again, thick and metallic. When did you find this out? I asked. 3 weeks ago, Arlo admitted, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. The firm got a sealed subpoena from the Southern District of New York. They demanded all communications regarding the LLC. Your dad called a closed-door meeting with the senior partners. I was the one who compiled the digital files. That's when I saw the metadata. That's when when I saw they were setting you up, and you didn't tell me. I couldn't. Arlo snapped, his voice cracking with panic. Elena, they'd ruin me. Your father would have me disbarred, blacklisted, and probably indicted as a co-conspirator. I left that drive on your table on purpose last month. I was hoping you'd find the financial discrepancies and run. I didn't think you'd walk into his study and confront him on the night of his anniversary gala. I didn't know about the fires, Arlo. I just saw the missing $2.4 million. Well, you forced their hand, he said grimly. They were probably going to let the indictment drop on Tuesday, let the feds arrest you, and then let your mother testify that you've been erratic, addicted, and making reckless investments. But when you showed them you had the metadata tracing the fraud back to Richard, they couldn't risk you talking. It made perfect, sickening sense. A drunken, tragic fall down the cellar stairs. The troubled heiress freezes to death after a relapse. The primary target of the federal investigation is dead. The grieving family cooperates fully with the FBI, blaming everything on my supposed secret life. Maya, the secondary director, cries and takes a plea deal for a suspended sentence, claiming I forced her to sign. The investigation closes. The insurance money stays in my father's offshore accounts. He didn't just look at me like a flat tire on that rug. He looked at me like a solved problem. Arlo took the next exit, tires squealing slightly on the wet pavement. We drove in silence for another 10 minutes through the decaying industrial outskirts of Poughkeepsie. He pulled into the parking lot of a single-story motel with a flickering neon sign that read The Pines. The lot was empty except for a rusted pickup truck. Arlo put the car in park and kept the engine running. He didn't look at me. Room 14, he said, pointing to a door near the back. The key is in the envelope with the cash. It's booked under the name Sable Trask, paid for in cash by a friend of mine 2 hours ago. No cameras in the lobby. I looked at him. He was terrified. His foot was hovering over the brake pedal, ready to bolt the second I closed the door. What am I supposed to do now, Arlo? I asked softly. I can't go to the police. If I walk into an FBI field office, they'll arrest me for arson and wire fraud. You hide, he said, turning to look at me, his eyes wide and pleading. You take that cash, you get on a bus heading west, and you disappear. You don't use your real name. You don't log into your email. You don't call anyone. You just vanish, Elena, and let them get away with it? They already got away with it. Arlo yelled, hitting the steering wheel with the heel of his hand. Elena, they own the board. They own the local cops. Your dad has a private security firm on retainer that makes the Secret Service look like mall cops. If you stay, you are going to die. Or worse, you'll spend the rest of your life in federal prison for burning 7 people alive. I looked down at the white envelope in my lap. $12,000. A burner phone. A fake name. A one-way ticket to erasing myself. Thank you, Arlo, I said quietly. I opened the door and stepped out into the freezing wind. I shut the car door, and before I even reached the concrete walkway of the motel, Arlo was reversing out of the lot, his taillights fading quickly down the dark road. I found room 14. I slid the physical brass key into the lock and pushed the door open. The room smelled like stale cigarette smoke, heavy bleach, and damp carpet. There was a saggy queen bed covered in a faded floral bedspread, a bulky tube television mounted in the corner, and a small particle board desk. I locked the deadbolt behind me, fastened the chain, and walked over to the desk. I pulled my iPad, my dead cell phone, and the envelope out of my hoodie pockets. I sat down in the rickety wooden chair. My hands were finally starting to thaw, the tips of my fingers tingling painfully. I needed to secure the only piece of leverage I had. I connected the iPad to the motel's unsecured Wi-Fi. It was risky, but I had no choice. I opened the Nest dashboard to check the cloud server. A gray screen loaded. Archive empty. No recordings found for the specified date. My heart stopped. I refreshed the page. Archive empty. My father's IT guy had already scrubbed the server. They realized the cameras were there, or they just ran a standard sweep of the network, and they wiped the entire night. Panic seized my chest, tight and suffocating. I closed the app and opened my local file manager. In the hospital, right before my mother walked back into the room, I had tapped the export button. I had watched the progress bar fill up. I tapped the folder marked downloads. There was a single MP4 file sitting there. Front_study_2130.mp4. I pressed play. The video loaded. There I was, walking into the frame with the manila folders. There was my father, adjusting his boatie. There was Richard, shoving Maya. There was the moment I collapsed. There was my father, delivering the order to lock me in the freezer. I paused it on his face, the cold, dead look in his eyes. I had it. The digital file was safe on the iPad's hard drive, but one copy wasn't enough. If they found me, they would smash the tablet and I would have nothing. I needed to back it up somewhere they couldn't reach, somewhere Stellan couldn't hack into. I opened the envelope Arlo had given me. I counted the cash. 12 stacks of $100 bills. I pulled out the burner phone. It was a cheap plastic Android model. I powered it on. No contacts. No history. A fresh, untraceable number. I used the burner to create a brand new encrypted email address on a Swiss server. I connected the burner to the iPad via Bluetooth, transferred the MP4 file, and emailed it to the secure address. Then I uploaded it to 3 separate anonymous file hosting sites, writing down the complex URLs on a piece of motel stationery. I folded the paper and shoved it deep into my shoe. It was 6:30 a.m. The sun was starting to bleed through the cheap motel curtains, casting a gray, sickly light over the room. In Greenwich, my father was probably waking up in his custom-made California king bed. He would be expecting a phone call from the hospital, informing him of my tragic passing. Or, if Luz the nurse had done her job, he was about to find out I was missing. I needed the original forged documents. I needed the metadata drive. Arlo said he left the drive on my table, but he didn't know I had moved it. When I realized what the files were, I hadn't kept the drive in my apartment. I knew my mother had a key to my place and snooped regularly. I had taken the physical drive and locked it in a safety deposit box at a small credit union in Lower Manhattan, an account I opened when I was 19, completely separate from the family trust. My regular bank accounts were frozen, but the credit union box required a physical key and a signature. If I could get the drive and attach it to the video of the attempted murder, I could take the whole package straight to the U.S. Attorney's office. I could prove the arson was a setup, but getting to Manhattan meant walking right into the belly of the beast. My father's security team would be monitoring the train stations. They would be watching my apartment building. They would be waiting for my credit cards to ping. The burner phone in my hand buzzed. I dropped it on the desk like it was burning. I stared at the screen. Incoming call, unknown number. Nobody knew this number. I had turned the phone on less than 10 minutes ago. Arlo was the only one who even knew I had it. I stared at it as it vibrated against the particle board. 5 rings. 6 rings. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and hit the green accept button. I brought the plastic casing to my ear. I didn't say a word. Arlo is a very sloppy boy, Elena. A smooth British voice said through the speaker. It was Stellan, my father's it fixer. Did he really think buying a burner phone at a bodega with cash would keep it off the network? Stellan sighed, sounding genuinely disappointed. He paired his own phone to his car's Bluetooth while the burner was sitting in his pocket. The telemetry data practically drew a map to Poughkeepsie. I stopped breathing. I looked at the motel door, the deadbolt, the flimsy chain. Your father doesn't want this to be messy, Stellan continued, his voice calm and professional. He has a private medical transport idling at a gas station about 2 miles from your current location. If you walk outside and get into the back of the van, you go quietly to New Canaan. You get a nice, comfortable room. You eat good food. You stay out of the federal spotlight. And if I don't, I whispered. If you don't, Stellan said. I press a button on my keyboard, and the FBI field office in Manhattan receives an anonymous tip containing irrefutable digital proof that you ordered the Queen's fire. I also send them the GPS coordinates of your burner phone. You won't go to rehab, Elena. You'll go to a federal holding cell, and you won't survive the pre-trial detention. He paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. Look out the window, Elena. I stood up slowly. I walked over to the window and peeled back a tiny corner of the floral curtain. Sitting in the empty parking lot, directly across from room 14, was a black, unmarked transport van. Its engine was running. Exhaust plumed thick and white in the freezing morning air. The tinted driver's side window rolled down just an inch, and I saw the red cherry of a lit cigarette glowing in the dark interior. You have 3 minutes to open the door, Stellan said. The line clicked dead. I dropped the phone. It hit the stained carpet with a muffled thud. 3 minutes. Stellan wasn't prone to exaggeration. He was a man of exact numbers. If he said 3 minutes, I had exactly 180 seconds before the doors of that van slid open, and 2 men in heavy coats walked across the lot to drag me out by my hair. They wanted this quiet. My father abhorred a scene. A struggle in a motel parking lot could mean a 911 call from the manager. A 911 call meant local police. Local police meant a report, a paper trail, questions. They needed me to walk out voluntarily. I looked at the iPad on the desk. The video was backed up to the Swiss server, but I couldn't risk them getting the physical hardware and seeing the browser history. I grabbed the heavy glass ashtray off the nightstand. I placed the iPad on the floor, raised the ashtray high above my head, and brought it down as hard as I could on the center of the screen. The glass shattered. The lithium battery hissed. I brought the ashtray down twice more until the casing was bent and the motherboard was crushed. I kicked the pieces under the bed. 2 minutes. I grabbed the envelope of cash and shoved it into the front pocket of my hoodie. I walked into the cramped bathroom. There was a small, frosted window above the shower enclosure. It was painted shut, layered with years of cheap white gloss. I climbed into the dry tub in my plastic flip-flops. I pulled a thin white towel off the rack, wrapped it around my elbow, and drove my arm straight through the center of the glass. The pane broke with a sharp, crackling sound, loud enough to make my ears ring in the tiny tiled room. I held my breath, listening. Nothing but the rumble of the van's engine out front. I used the towel to clear the jagged edges of glass from the frame. The gap was barely a 1.5 feet wide. The freezing wind immediately whipped into the bathroom, carrying the smell of wet pine and exhaust. 1 minute. I pulled myself up, scraping my ribs against the aluminum track. The cold metal bit through my thin sweatpants. I wriggled my shoulders through, pushing headfirst into the freezing dawn, and tumbled out. I hit the ground hard. The snow here was deep, untouched, piled up against the cinderblock foundation of the motel. I rolled onto my side, gasping as the icy crust scraped my cheek. I didn't stay down. I scrambled to my feet. Behind the motel was a steep embankment leading up to a line of dense, skeletal trees. Beyond the trees, I could hear the dull roar of the interstate. I started climbing. My flip-flops offered zero traction. I slipped, my hands plunging into the snow, the cheap fleece gloves soaking through in seconds. I kept moving, pulling myself up by exposed roots and frozen weeds. When I reached the tree line, I looked back down. 2 men in dark winter coats were walking across the parking lot toward room 14. They moved with purposeful, terrifying calm. One of them had a heavy silver keyring in his hand. They didn't even look around. They just walked straight to the door, unlocked it, and stepped inside. I didn't wait to see them come back out. I turned and ran into the woods. I moved parallel to the highway for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 20 minutes. My feet were completely numb. The plastic straps of the flip-flops had rubbed the skin raw between my toes, and the cuts were burning. The wind cut through my college hoodie like it was made of paper. If I didn't get inside somewhere, Stellan wouldn't have to worry about me. The elements would finish the job my father started in the wine cellar. Through the trees, I saw the glowing yellow sign of a truck stop. It was a massive, sprawling concrete oasis with a dozen diesel pumps, a diner attached to the side, and a row of idling 18-wheelers. I stumbled down the embankment, sliding the last 10 feet on my backside, and hit the pavement of the service road. I walked toward the diner entrance. I caught my reflection in the glass doors before I pushed them open. I looked exactly like my mother had designed me to to look, a raving, unstable addict on a bender. My hair was matted with snow and sweat. My face was pale and scratched. I was wearing oversized sweatpants and no coat in 20-degree weather. I pushed through the doors. The blast of hot, grease-scented air hit me so hard my knees almost buckled. The diner was mostly empty. 2 truckers sat at the counter drinking coffee. A waitress with a tired face and a pink uniform was wiping down a booth in the back. Her name tag read Coralie. I walked straight to the women's restroom in the back hallway, keeping my head down. I locked the heavy wooden door behind me and collapsed against it, sliding down to the dirty tile floor. I pulled the envelope out of my pocket. The cash was still there, $12,000. But money is useless if you look like you just crawled out of a dumpster. If I tried to buy a bus ticket or pay for a cab looking like this, someone would call the cops. And right now, the cops were the last people I could afford to see. I needed clothes. I needed a coat. I needed shoes. I stood up and walked over to the mirror above the sinks. I turned on the hot water and splashed it on my face, wincing as it stung the scratches on my cheek. I used a rough paper towel to scrub the dried blood off my knuckles where I had ripped the IV out. There was a soft knock on the restroom door. I froze, the paper towel crushed in my fist. "Hey, honey," a woman's voice called out through the wood. It was the waitress. "Coralie, you okay in there? You looked half frozen when you came in." I didn't answer. "I'm not gonna bother you," she said, her voice dropping a little lower. "But if you need a minute, take it. Just don't pass out on my floor. Manager's a real hard ass about loitering." I unlocked the door and pulled it open an inch. Coralie was standing there, holding a fresh pot of coffee. She had kind, exhausted eyes, surrounded by deep wrinkles that spoke of a lifetime of double shifts. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice hoarse. I had a really bad night." She looked me up and down. She looked at my bare, freezing feet in the cheap plastic flip-flops. She didn't look at me with pity or suspicion. She looked at me with recognition. It was the look of a woman who had seen 100 girls running from something awful in the middle of the night. "My shift ends in 10 minutes, Coralie said quietly. "I got a spare pair of sneakers in my locker. They might be a little big, but they're better than those. And there's an old wool coat in the lost and found that's been sitting there since October." I stared at her. The kindness of a total stranger felt sharper than my father's cruelty. It physically ached in my chest. "Why?" I asked. Coralie shrugged, adjusting her grip on the coffee pot. "My daughter left the house looking like you do about 4 years ago. I pray every night someone gave her a coat." She turned and walked back toward the counter. 10 minutes later, I walked out of the truck stop wearing a faded brown wool peacoat that swallowed my frame, and a pair of white New Balance sneakers that were a size too large but wonderfully warm. My own socks were a pair of thick gray wool ones Coralie had pulled from her bag. I found her out in the parking lot. She was scraping ice off the windshield of a battered blue sedan. I walked up to her. I pulled a $100 bill from my pocket, just one, peeled carefully from the stack in the bathroom so I didn't look like I was carrying a small fortune, and held it out. Coralie stopped scraping. She looked at the bill, then at me, and shook her head. "Keep it. You're gonna need it for a bus ticket," she said. "Please," I insisted, pushing it toward her hand. "For the coat. For the shoes." She sighed, took the bill, and shoved it into her apron pocket without looking at it. "Where are you trying to go?" "The city," I said. "Manhattan," she raised an eyebrow. "Most girls looking like you are running away from the city, not toward it." "I have to get something," I said, "before they take it away." Coralie studied my face for a long moment. "There's a commuter line that runs out of Beacon. It's about 20 miles south of here. I can drop you at the station. Train takes you right into Grand Central. You don't have to do that. Get in the car," she said, opening the driver's side door. Before I changed my mind, I got into the passenger seat. The heater barely worked, blowing lukewarm air against my legs, but it felt like a luxury. As we pulled out onto the highway, heading south toward Beacon, I stared out the window at the gray morning sky. My father and Stellan thought I was running away. They thought they had terrified me into disappearing. Arlo wanted me to take the money and vanish into a new life under a fake name. But running meant leaving Maya to take the fall for the money, while I took the fall for the fires. It meant letting my father erase 7 lives in Queens and add mine to the tally without a second thought. I reached into my pocket and felt the hard edges of the burner phone. I hadn't destroyed it. I needed it. We arrived at the Beacon train station just before 8 o'clock. The parking lot was filling up with commuters in wool coats and briefcases, clutching thermal mugs of coffee. I blended in a little better now with the oversized coat and the sneakers, just another tired person facing the morning commute. I thanked Coralie. She didn't say much, just nodded and told me to stay safe, pulling away before I even reached the platform stairs. I bought a one-way ticket to Grand Central using a $20 bill at the kiosk. I boarded the train, finding a window seat in the middle of a quiet car. As the train lurched forward, rattling along the edge of the Hudson River, I finally let myself close my eyes for a minute. The exhaustion hit me like a physical weight, pulling me down into a dark, dreamless space. But I couldn't sleep. Every time I drifted off, I felt the phantom sensation of my knees buckling, the cold floor of the study, my father's dead eyes staring down at me. I opened my eyes and looked at the river outside. When we hit the tunnels of Manhattan, the cell service dropped out, and the lights in the train car flickered. We pulled into Grand Central at 9:15 a.m. The terminal was a massive, chaotic hive of movement, thousands of people rushing in every direction, their footsteps echoing off the vaulted ceiling. I moved with the crowd, keeping my head down. My destination was a small, independent credit union on West 14th Street. It was 3 subway stops away. I bought a Metro card with cash and caught the downtown train. My hands were shaking again, but not from the cold this time. It was the adrenaline. I was back in the blast radius. If Stellan was monitoring the transit cameras, or if my father had his private security sweeping the usual spots, I was walking right into a trap. But they didn't know about the credit union. I had opened that account with a high school ID and $50 from my first summer job. It wasn't linked to the trust. It wasn't tied to my primary email. It was a ghost box. I got off at 14th Street and walked up the subway stairs into the bright, biting sunlight of the city. strategy. The bank was half a block away. It was a modest brick building with a faded awning. I pushed through the glass doors. The interior was quiet, smelling of floor wax and old paper. There was a single teller behind the counter, an older man counting out 20s. I walked up to the customer service desk. A woman with glasses on a beaded chain looked up from her computer monitor. Her name tag read Vita. "Can I help you?" Vita asked with a polite, professional smile. "I need to access my safety deposit box," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Box number 412. "Of course," she said. "I just need your ID and your key." I reached into the pocket of my sweatpants. My heart skipped a beat. My wallet was there. I pulled out my driver's license and slid it across the desk. Then, I reached into the zippered compartment of my wallet and pulled out the small brass key I had kept hidden there for years. I placed it next to the ID. Vita took the ID, typed my name into her keyboard, and waited for the screen to load. I held my breath. If my father's people had somehow found this account, if they had filed a court order claiming I was medically unfit, a red flag would pop up right now. Vita would tell me there was a hold on the account. She would excuse herself to make a phone call. The doors would lock. Vita glanced at the screen, then back at me. She smiled. "Right this way, Elena," she said, picking up her master key. I let out a slow, quiet breath. She led me past the teller counter and into a small, windowless vault in the back. The walls were lined with hundreds of metal boxes. She found 412, inserted her master key into one lock, and stepped back. I inserted my brass key into the second lock and turned it. The heavy metal door popped open. Vita gave me a polite nod. "I'll give you a few minutes." She stepped out of the vault, closing the heavy gate behind her. I pulled the long metal drawer out. Inside, sitting on a bed of velvet lining, was a small black USB thumb drive. This was it. The metadata. The digital signatures. The IP addresses that proved my father and Richard had orchestrated the entire LLC fraud, forged my name, and funded the fires. I grabbed the drive and shoved it deep into the pocket of the peacoat. I slid the empty box back into place, locked it, and walked out of the vault. I thanked Vita, took my ID, and walked out of the bank onto 14th Street. I had the proof. I had the video. I had the drive. Now, I just needed to figure out who I could give it to without getting myself killed before they could hit publish. I walked down the block, heading toward a crowded coffee shop to sit down and think. As I approached the corner, my burner phone buzzed in my pocket. I stopped walking. The pedestrian traffic flowed around me. I pulled the phone out. It was a text message this time. Not from Stellan. Not from an unknown number. It was from Arlo's personal number. The text read, "They know you didn't get in the van. Stellan is at my apartment. He has my laptop. Do not go to the credit union." I stared at the screen, the words blurring together. Stellan had Arlo's laptop. Arlo knew about the credit union box. I had told him about it 3 years ago when we were dating, complaining about how my mother monitored my main accounts. He remembered. And if Stellan was interrogating Arlo right now, I looked up from the phone. Parked directly across the street, idling in front of a fire hydrant, was a black Mercedes SUV with heavily tinted windows. The driver's side door opened, and a man in a dark suit stepped out onto the sidewalk. He didn't look like a thug. He looked like private equity. He adjusted his tie, looked directly at me across the 4 lanes of traffic, and started walking toward the crosswalk. I didn't freeze. I didn't even blink. I just turned on my heel and walked directly into the thickest part of the pedestrian crowd heading east toward Union Square. I kept my head down, burying my chin into the oversized collar of Coralie's wool coat. I didn't run. Running draws eyes. Running makes people step out of your way and clears a path for the person chasing you. I just matched the aggressive, hurried pace of a New York morning commute, weaving tightly between business people, delivery guys, and tourists. I risked a glance over my shoulder when I reached the corner of 5th Avenue. The man in the suit was on my side of the street now. He was about 50 yards back, pushing past a woman with a stroller, his eyes locked on the back of my coat. He wasn't running either, but his stride was massive. He was closing the distance. Stellan had clearly given them a description of what I was wearing. Or maybe I just stuck out like a sore thumb, a disheveled woman in a coat 3 sizes too big, looking panicked at 10 in the morning. I hit the subway entrance at Union Square and practically threw myself down the concrete stairs. The air immediately turned hot and dense, smelling of roasted nuts and ozone. I kept my hand wrapped tightly around the USB drive in my pocket. The turnstiles were packed. I pulled out the Metro card I had bought at Grand Central, my hands shaking so badly I dropped it. It fluttered to the dirty tile floor. I heard heavy footsteps on the stairs behind me. I snatched the card up, swiped it through the reader, and shoved my hips against the metal bar. It clicked and let me through. I didn't look back. I bolted down the ramp toward the NQRSW lines. A downtown Q train was sitting at the platform, its doors open, the automated voice chiming the warning that it was about to leave. I sprinted the last 20 feet and threw myself between the sliding metal doors just as they began to close. The rubber edges clamped shut on the sleeve of my coat, then quickly retracted and slammed shut for good. I spun around and looked through the scratched glass of the door. The man in the suit was standing on the platform. He was completely out of breath, his tie slightly askew. He walked right up to the window. We were less than 2 feet apart, separated only by the glass. He didn't look angry. He looked entirely dead-eyed, just like my father. He pulled a cell phone out of his jacket pocket and started typing. The train jerked forward, and his face disappeared into the dark of the tunnel. I collapsed into an empty plastic seat, pulling my knees tight together. My heart was hammering so violently against my ribs I thought it might actually crack bone. He was texting Stellan, which meant Stellan now knew I was on a downtown Q train. They would have people waiting at Canal Street, at DeKalb, anywhere I might try to transfer or surface. My father's security firm had dozens of guys just like him on payroll. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the burner phone. Arlo's text was still on the screen. "They know you didn't get in the van. Stellan is at my apartment. He has my laptop. Do not go to the credit union." If Stellan had Arlo's laptop, and Stellan had caught Arlo buying the burner phone by tracking the Bluetooth Bluetooth in his car, it was highly likely Stellan also pulled the burner's number from Arlo's iCloud, or call logs. That was how the suit had found me so fast on 14th Street. The phone was a GPS beacon in my pocket. I stood up. The train rattled wildly as it approached the next station at 8th Street. I walked over to the doors. There was a metal trash can bolted to the platform right outside. As soon as the doors parted, I tossed the burner phone straight into the garbage. I didn't get off the train. I let the doors close again. Without the phone, I was blind, but I was also invisible. I sat back down and tried to think. I couldn't go to the FBI. Not yet. Stellan said he would release the forged digital trail proving I ordered the fires. If I walked into a federal building and handed them the metadata on this USB drive, it would be my word against a mountain of expertly crafted digital evidence pointing back to my own apartment's IP address. I would be arrested on the spot. My father would hire me a lawyer who would advise me to plead insanity. I needed a microphone. I needed someone who could look at the metadata, understand what it meant, and publish it before my father could bury it in court filings. Someone he couldn't pay off, threaten, or fire. I stared at the subway map plastered above the seats across from me. My eyes scanned the boroughs. Brooklyn. 3 years ago, a mid-tier investigative journalist named Imogen Quill published a scathing, heavily researched piece on my father's use of offshore shell companies to evade property taxes in Manhattan. It was a brilliant piece of journalism. It was entirely accurate. My father destroyed her. He didn't just sue her publication. He sued her personally for defamation. He tied her up in litigation for 2 years until her legal fees bankrupted her. He hired private investigators to dig up dirt on her divorce and leaked it to the tabloids. He got her blacklisted from every major paper on the East Coast. Last I heard, Imogen Quill was scraping by as an editor at a small, independent online outlet running out of a converted warehouse in Gowanus. She hated my father with a burning personal passion. She was exactly who I needed. I stayed on the train past Canal Street, ignoring the knot of panic in my stomach. If they were waiting for me, they were looking for a GPS signal that was currently sitting in a trash can in the Village. I got off at Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn and transferred to the R train, riding it down to Union Street. When I walked up the stairs into the neighborhood of Gowanus, the air smelled like industrial runoff and old brick. It was a far cry from the pristine, manicured lawns of Greenwich. I kept my head down, pulling the knit hat from the CVs low over my forehead. I walked for 6 blocks until I found the address I had memorized from a hate read session years ago when my mother was complaining about Imogen's article. It was a crumbling brick warehouse, squeezed between a self-storage facility and a commercial bakery. A small plaque by the heavy metal door read the Gowanus Standard. I buzzed the intercom. Yeah? A voice crackled through the speaker. It sounded young, bored. I'm here to see Imogen Quill, I said. Do you have an appointment? Tell her it's Elena. Tell her I have the files on the fires. There was a long pause. Then, the heavy metal door clicked and buzzed. I pulled it open and walked into a dimly lit lobby that smelled like stale coffee and printing ink. I climbed a flight of wooden stairs to the 2nd floor. The newsroom was just one large, open-plan loft with exposed pipes and a dozen mismatched desks. Only a few people were typing away at laptops. In the back corner, sitting behind a desk piled high with manila folders and empty coffee cups, was Imogen Quill. She looked exactly like I remembered from her author photos, just older and infinitely more exhausted. Her dark hair was pulled into a messy knot, and she was wearing thick-rimmed glasses, staring aggressively at a computer monitor. I walked across the creaking floorboards. She didn't look up until I was standing directly in front of her desk. She took me in. The oversized coat, the scratched face, the frantic energy radiating off me. Recognition flashed in her eyes, followed instantly by a deep, defensive suspicion. Elena, she said, leaning back in her chair and crossing her arms. Her voice was dry, gravelly. I read you were in rehab in New Canaan. Tragic relapse at the anniversary gala. My father released a statement? I asked, my stomach dropping. His PR firm blasted it to every outlet in the city an hour ago, Imogen said, gesturing to her screen, asking for privacy during this difficult time, stating you wandered out into the cold in a state of psychosis. She tilted her head, studying me. You don't look psychotic. You look like you're running for your life. They tried to kill me, Imogen. She let out a short, humorless laugh. Sure they did. And I'm the Queen of England. Why are you here, Elena? If your dad sent you to entrap me in some new lawsuit, you can save it. I have $50 in my checking account. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the USB drive and set it down on the clutter of her desk, right next to a half-eaten bagel. I found the internal metadata, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. The LC that bought the properties in Astoria and Queens, the ones that burned down for the insurance money. My father and my uncle Richard forged my digital signature to make me the primary director. They set me up to take the fall for the arson and the fraud. Imogen stared at the small black drive. She didn't touch it. 7 people died in those fires, she said quietly. I know. And you expect me to believe your father? A man who relies entirely on his pristine corporate image, orchestrated mass murder for a real estate flip? I have a video, I said, from last night, me confronting them about the forged signatures. 3 minutes later, my father poisons my drink. I pass out. He orders Richard to carry my body to the wine cellar and turn the temperature down to freezing to make it look like an accident. I back the video up to a secure server. This drive has the digital proof of the forgery. Imogen finally looked up from the drive, meeting my eyes. The cynicism was fading, replaced by the sharp, dangerous focus of a reporter smelling blood in the water. If this is real, she said slowly, this doesn't just put him in prison. This dismantles the entire empire. I don't care about the empire, I said. I just want to survive the week. If I go to the cops, he'll bury this and lock me up. I need you to publish it. All of it. The metadata, the video, everything. Make it so public he can't buy his way out. Imogen reached out and picked up the drive. She turned it over in her fingers. Let's see what you've got, she murmured, plugging it into the side of her laptop. I pulled up a folding chair and sat beside her, my leg bouncing bouncing with nervous energy. Imogen opened the file directory. The drive was packed with hundreds of PDFs, internal memos, and encrypted email logs Stellan had neglected to permanently wipe before Arlo made the copy. She opened the first folder. She started reading. For 10 minutes, the only sound in the corner of the loft was the click of her mouse and her occasional sharp intake of breath. Christ, she whispered, scrolling through a ledger of wire transfers. These payouts. They funneled the insurance money straight through a dummy corporation in the Caymans, then used it to buy the adjacent lots. Look at the digital signatures on the founding documents, I told her. She opened the PDF. She pulled up the document properties. Created by Stellan Vance. IP address routing through Greenwich, not your apartment in the city. Exactly. They spoofed my location later when they submitted the tax forms to make it look like I was running it from home. Imogen leaned back, rubbing her temples. This is a nuke, Elena, but it's not enough to just post it on a blog. If I publish this without federal backing, your dad's lawyers will file an emergency injunction, take our servers down in an hour, and Stellan will wipe the digital footprints before the DOJ even wakes up. So what do? We need a dead man's switch, Imogen said, turning to look at me. And we need a physical paper trail that Stellan can't hack. The digital files are great, but Stellan can argue they were fabricated. Did you ever see physical copies of these deeds? Anything with wedding? I thought back to the study. The stack of manila folders I had slammed onto my father's desk. The folders, I said. Last night, I had physical printouts that Arlo made from the original files. My father didn't destroy them in front of me. He probably locked them in his wall safe. In Greenwich. Yes, Imogen sighed, closing the laptop screen halfway. Elena, if you don't have the hard copies, he can spin this. He can say you hired a hacker to frame him because you were angry about being cut off for your addiction. He'll say the video of you passing out was just you having a medical episode, and locking you in the cellar was a misunderstanding by the staff. I felt the blood drain from my face. You saw the metadata. You know it's real. I know it's real, she said gently, but I also know your father's lawyers. They will shred this without physical corroboration. Before I could argue, the heavy metal door at the front of the loft buzzed loudly. Imogen frowned, looking over the tops of the cubicles toward the entrance. I'm not expecting anyone. The buzzer sounded again, longer this time. A sustained, aggressive noise. One of the junior writers near the front door got up and walked over to the intercom. He pushed the button. Gowanus Standard. He listened for a moment. Then he turned around and looked directly across the room at Imogen. Hey, Imogen, the kid called out, looking confused. There's a guy down here. Says he's from the New York State Medical Board. He says they're looking for a patient who walked out of Westchester Medical Center this morning. Imogen's head snapped toward me. The last traces of journalistic skepticism vanished from her face, replaced by a rigid, cold focus. She didn't look at me like a crazy heiress anymore. She looked at me like a massive liability sitting in her newsroom. Emerson, do not buzz him in, Imogen called out, keeping her voice entirely level. Tell him the front door lock is jammed, and he needs to hold on a minute, then step away from the intercom. She didn't wait to see if the kid obeyed. Her fingers flew across her keyboard, dragging the entire contents of the USB drive onto a secure local folder on her desktop. A progress bar popped up on the screen. Estimated time, 4 minutes. 4 minutes is too long, I whispered, standing up so fast the folding chair scraped loudly against the wooden floor. If he knows I'm here, he won't wait outside. They'll just break the glass. He's not breaking glass in broad daylight in front of a bakery with a line down the block, Imogen said, though her eyes were darting nervously to the progress bar. He's a corporate fixer, not a mobster. He needs this to look clean. A medical extraction. The intercom buzzed again. This time it didn't stop. Whoever was down there was just leaning his thumb on the button. Imogen, Emerson called out, his voice pitching up with anxiety. He's kicking the door. He says he has a court order. I don't care if he has the Pope, Emerson. Step away from the door. Imogen yelled back. She grabbed a battered leather messenger bag from under her desk and shoved her laptop into it, yanking the USB drive out before the transfer was even finished. She tossed the small black drive at my chest. I caught it with numb fingers. I got enough of the ledgers to verify the LLC structure, she said, shrugging into a heavy canvas jacket. But I didn't get the video. The file was too large. I need the original physical documents to tie your father to the metadata. And I need a secure terminal to upload what I have. We can't stay here. Where do we go? I asked. Out the back. Move. She led me away from the front windows, weaving through the maze of messy desks toward the rear of the loft. There was a heavy metal fire door painted the same dingy gray as the walls. Imogen slammed her hand against the crash bar. The door groaned open, revealing a rusted iron fire escape overlooking a narrow, trash-filled alley. We stepped out onto the grating. The freezing wind whipped up the alley, cutting right through Coralie's oversized wool coat. Down, Imogen ordered. We climbed down 3 flights of slick, icy iron stairs. My oversized sneakers felt incredibly clumsy on the narrow steps. When we hit the pavement of the alley, Imogen didn't hesitate. She grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the chain link fence at the far end, away from the street where the medical board imposter was currently kicking in her front door. We squeezed through a gap in the fence and came out behind the commercial bakery. The smell of yeast and burnt sugar was overpowering. A massive delivery truck was idling in the loading dock, its diesel engine rumbling loudly enough to cover the sound of our footsteps. Imogen kept her head down, marching us past the truck and out onto the adjacent street. We blended instantly into a stream of people walking toward the subway. He tracked you, Imogen said under her breath, walking so fast I had to jog slightly to keep up. How? I had a burner phone, I panted. I threw it away in a trash can on 8th Street. He must have pinged it before I dumped it, and then figured out I transferred to the R train based on the station cameras. Your dad is paying for military-grade surveillance on a civilian target, Imogen muttered, which means he is absolutely terrified. He knows the second you go public, the federal indictment shifts from you to him. We turned down a residential block lined with brownstones. Imogen marched up the steps of one of the buildings, pulling a ring of keys from her pocket. She unlocked unlocked the heavy wooden double doors and shoved me inside, locking them quickly behind us. The foyer was small, smelling of old carpet and floor wax. She led me up 2 flights of stairs and unlocked an apartment door on the 3rd floor. It was a tiny, cluttered studio. Books were stacked in towers against the walls. The radiator was hissing violently in the corner, pumping dry, blistering heat into the room. Imogen dropped her bag on the small dining table and pulled her laptop out. "My place," she said, not looking at me as she booted up the computer. "It's under my ex-husband's name. The lease, the utilities, everything. Your dad's guys don't know about it. They think I still live in the basement apartment in Queens that they got me evicted from 2 years ago." I collapsed onto a worn velvet armchair near the window. My legs were shaking so violently I couldn't stand anymore. The adrenaline crash was hitting me, dragging me down into a pit of deep, terrifying exhaustion. I hadn't eaten since the tiny hors d'oeuvres at the gala. I hadn't slept in over 24 hours. My body felt like it was shutting down. "I need the physical folders, Elena," Imogen said, typing furiously on her laptop. "I can start drafting the piece, and I can start verifying the offshore account Stellan used to move the insurance money. But without the folders with your father's handwritten notes and the original wet signatures, his lawyers will claim Stellan acted alone and framed everyone." "I know," I said, rubbing my hands over my face. "They're in the wall safe in his study. The same study from the video. Who has the combination? My father, Stellan, and Maya." Imogen stopped typing. She looked at me over the top of her laptop screen. "Your cousin? The one who took the fake plea deal? She's his secondary director," I explained, the words feeling heavy on my tongue. "He uses her for all the low-level administrative stuff for the shell companies. She doesn't know she's committing fraud. She just signs what he tells her to sign because he pays her tuition and her rent. She has the safe code to file away the incorporation papers. You called her from the hospital," Imogen recalled. "You said she was reciting a script. She was terrified. Richard hit her hard. He told her if she didn't stick to the story, she'd be next." I leaned my head back against the chair. "She won't help me, Imogen. If I call her, she'll just report back to them." "Then you don't call her," Imogen said practically. "You corner her. Where is she right now?" "It's Monday," I said, looking at the clock on the stove. It was almost noon. "She has a standing appointment every Monday at 1 o'clock with her therapist on the Upper East Side. My father insists on it. He pays the bills. It's his way of controlling her mental health narrative. Will she be there today, after everything that happened last night?" "Especially today," I said bitterly. "My father will want it on the medical record that Maya was deeply traumatized by my tragic relapse. He'll use the therapist's notes to build his defense." Imogen slammed her laptop shut. "Then that's where we go. You get her alone, you get the safe code, and we get those folders." "I can't go to the Upper East Side," I said, my voice rising in panic. "Are you insane? Stellan has my face on a watch list. They're monitoring the transit hubs. If I walk into a high-end medical building looking like a vagrant, security will tackle me before I even reach the elevator." Imogen walked over to her small closet. She pulled out a black cashmere turtleneck, a pair of dark tailored trousers, and a sleek wool trench coat. She tossed them onto the armchair next to me. "So you stop looking like a vagrant," she said. "We're roughly the same size. Put those on. There's makeup in the bathroom. Cover the scratches on your face. Pull your hair back into a tight bun. You're going to walk into that building looking exactly like the daughter of a billionaire." I stared at the clothes. The cashmere felt incredibly soft under my fingertips, a harsh contrast to the rough wool of Coralie's coat. "What about the cameras?" I asked. "We'll take a cab, pay in cash, and drop off 2 blocks away. Keep your head down. I'll handle the front desk." Imogen walked into the small kitchenette and grabbed 2 bottles of water and a protein bar. She tossed the bar to me. "Eat that. You look like you're going to pass out, and we don't have time for a medical emergency." I tore the wrapper open and forced myself to chew the dense, chalky bar. It tasted like sawdust, but my stomach clamped down on it instantly. I drank half the bottle of water in one long pull, then stood up and walked into the bathroom. The woman staring back at me in the mirror was a ghost. The pale skin, the bruised under eyes, the raw scratches across my cheek. I looked exactly like the broken, troubled girl my father was telling the world I was. I stripped off the oversized sweatpants and the college hoodie. I washed my face with cold water, wincing as the soap stung my cuts. I found a bottle of Imogen's foundation and carefully tapped it over the scratches until they were muted, hidden under a layer of expensive beige pigment. I brushed my hair flat and twisted it into a severe, sleek knot at the base of my neck. I put on the turtleneck and the trousers. They fit perfectly. I slipped the trench coat over my shoulders. I looked like Elena again. I looked like the primary director of a multi-million-dollar real estate LLC. I walked back out to the studio. Imogen was waiting by the door, scrolling through her phone. She looked up, gave me a brief, approving nod, and shoved her phone into her pocket. "Let's go," she said. We walked down to the street and hailed a yellow cab on 4th Avenue. Imogen handed the driver a 20 and told him to drop us at 72nd and Park. The ride was agonizingly slow. Traffic crawled across the bridge, the gray sky pressing down heavily on the city. I stared out the window, watching the familiar streets of Manhattan slide past. Every time I saw a black SUV, my heart seized. Every time a man in a dark suit crossed the street, my hands clamped into fists. "Maya's therapist is Dr. Hester Vance," I said quietly, keeping my eyes on the window. Imogen turned her head sharply. "Vance? Like Stellan Vance?" "His sister," I confirmed. "My father likes to keep his medical professionals in the family. She's fully licensed, highly respected, and entirely bought and paid for. Whatever happens in that room goes directly into a file on Stellan's server. So Maya is essentially walking into an interrogation," Imogen realized. "Exactly. Dr. Vance will prod her, record her reactions, and make sure she's sticking to the script Richard beat into her. If Maya wavers, Dr. Vance will prescribe a heavy sedative and call Stellan to arrange a rest period at a private facility. We can't let her go into that session," Imogen said. The cab pulled over at the corner of 72nd. We got out into the biting wind. The Upper East Side was quiet, populated by dog walkers and nannies pushing luxury strollers rollers. The architecture was immaculate, entirely disconnected from the grit of Gowanus. Maya's therapist's office was on the ground floor of a pre-war building halfway down the block. A discreet brass plaque next to a heavy oak door read, Dr. Hester Vance, Psychiatry, it's 12:45, I said, checking the Rolex Imogen had lent me. Maya's appointment is at 1. She usually arrives 10 minutes early and waits in the private courtyard out back. Dr. Vance encourages it for grounding. How do we get to the courtyard? There's a service alley that runs behind the buildings on this block. The gate is usually unlocked for the trash pickup. We walked quickly down the street, turning into the narrow, shadowed service alley. It was lined with massive industrial dumpsters, smelling faintly of bleach and decaying leaves. We moved in silence, our footsteps muffled by the damp pavement. Halfway down the alley, I spotted the wrought iron gate leading into Dr. Vance's private courtyard. It was slightly ajar. I peeked through the iron bars. Maya was sitting on a wrought iron bench in the center of the small, manicured garden. She was wearing a heavy camel coat, her knees pulled tightly to her chest. She had a paper cup of coffee in her hands, but she wasn't drinking it. She was just staring blankly at the frost on the stone tiles, rocking slightly back and forth. The side of her face was deeply bruised. A harsh, purplish-yellow stain covered her left cheekbone, spilling down toward her jaw. Richard's handiwork. Maya, I hissed through the gate. She didn't move. She just kept rocking, her eyes vacant. I pushed the gate open. It creaked loudly on its hinges. I stepped into the courtyard, with Imogen following closely behind me. Maya, it's me, I said, keeping my voice low. Maya finally looked up. Her eyes widened, the paper cup slipping from her hands and splashing hot coffee across the freezing stones. She scrambled backward on the bench, pressing herself against the brick wall of the building. No, she choked out, her voice trembling. No, you're in New Canaan. You're supposed to be in New Canaan. I never got in the van, I said, taking a slow step toward her. I kept my hands visible, like I was approaching a feral animal. Maya, I know what they're making you do. I know about Dr. Vance. You don't understand, Maya sobbed, wrapping her arms around her head as if expecting a blow. Stellan said if I didn't come to the session, if I didn't tell Dr. Vance exactly how crazy you were acting last night, they would void my trust. They would give the feds the documents with my signature on them. I'll go to prison. Elena, the documents have my signature as the primary director, Maya, I told her firmly. They didn't just frame you. They framed me. They set me up to take the fall for the fires. Maya stopped rocking. She lowered her arms slowly, staring at me with a mix of horror and confusion. Fires? She genuinely didn't know. Richard and my father hadn't even given her the dignity of knowing what she was taking the fall for. The LLC bought properties in Queens and Brooklyn. Imogen stepped forward, her voice calm and authoritative. Properties that were subsequently burned to the ground for insurance money. 7 people died. That's the federal indictment your uncle is hiding from. That's why he tried to kill Elena last night. Maya let out a strangled, whimpering sound. She covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes darting between me and Imogen. I need the safe code, Maya, I said, closing the distance between us and kneeling in front of the bench. I looked directly into her terrified eyes. I need the physical folders from the study. If I get those, I can take everything to the DOJ. I can prove Richard and my father orchestrated the whole thing. You won't go to prison. I swear to you, I will make sure you are protected. I can't, Maya whispered, tears spilling over her bruised cheek. Stellan changed the code this morning. He texted me the new one so I could file the updated trust documents after this session. He monitors the keypad. If the safe is opened, he gets an alert on his phone. Tell me the code, I demanded. Elena, if you open it, he'll know. He'll send the security team straight to the estate. I don't care, I said, my voice hardening. Give me the code. Maya hesitated, her entire body trembling. She looked toward the glass door leading into Dr. Vance's office. A shadow was moving behind the frosted pane. Dr. Vance was coming out to collect her. 7, 2, 4, 1, 9. Maya whispered rapidly. It's Stellan's employee ID number backward. Thank you, I said, grabbing her hand and squeezing it tightly. Don't go in there, Maya. Leave, get a cab, go to Penn Station, and buy a ticket on the first train heading south. Pay in cash. Don't use your cards. Don't answer your phone. Where am I supposed to go? She cried softly. Just get out of the city, Imogen instructed. We'll find you when it's over. The brass handle on the office door began to turn. I let go of Maya's hand and grabbed Imogen's sleeve. We bolted back out through the iron gate, pulling it shut just as the glass door swung open. We didn't run. We walked briskly down the service alley, turning the corner onto 72nd Street and melting back into the flow of pedestrian traffic. She's right about the keypad, Imogen said as we speed walked toward Lexington Avenue to catch a train. If Stellan gets a ping the second you open that safe, you'll have less than 10 minutes before your dad's private security rolls up the driveway. I know, I said. Greenwich is 45 minutes away by train. I can get in through the staff entrance in the kitchen. They leave it unlocked for the caterers to pick up their equipment. I'm coming with you. No. I stopped on the corner, turning to face her. You have the metadata. You have the IP traces. If they catch me in that house, they're going to put a bullet in my head and claim I broke in during a psychotic break. If you're there, they'll kill you too. You need to stay here. Prep the article. Write the headline. Be ready to hit publish the second I send you a picture of those folders. Imogen stared at me. She knew I was right. If we both went down, the story died with us. You send me the photos, Imogen said, her voice dead serious. And then, you get the hell out of that house. You don't try to confront him. You don't try to be a hero. You get the paper, and you run. I will. Imogen reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a burner phone, an old flip model, bulky and outdated. It's clean, she said, handing it to me. My number is programmed in on speed dial 1. Take a picture, send it, then smash the phone. Don't carry it with you. I took the phone and shoved it deep into the pocket of the trench coat. Good luck, Elena, Imogen said. Then she turned and walked down the subway stairs, disappearing into the crowd. I walked the opposite way, heading toward Grand Central. Central. I bought a ticket on the Metro North using the last of the cash Coralie had refused to take. The train ride to Greenwich felt like a funeral march. I sat by the window, watching the dense urban sprawl give way to the sprawling, manicured estates of Connecticut. The sky was darkening early, heavy with the promise of more snow. I got off at the Greenwich station just after 3 o'clock. The town was quiet, draped in the sleepy, wealthy stillness of a weekday afternoon. I didn't take a cab. A cab would leave a record. I walked. It took me 40 minutes to reach the edge of my family's property. The estate sat at the end of a long, winding private road lined with ancient oak trees. The massive iron gates at the front were closed, monitored by high-definition security cameras Stellan had installed 2 years ago. I bypassed the main entrance, slipping into the dense woods that bordered the eastern edge of the property. The snow here was deep and untouched. I ruined the expensive trousers and soaked the leather boots I had borrowed from Imogen, trudging through the freezing drifts until I reached the low stone wall marking the back perimeter. I climbed over the wall and dropped onto the perfectly manicured back lawn. The house loomed ahead of me, a sprawling, 3-story Tudor mansion made of dark brick and leaded glass. There were no cars in the circular driveway. My father was likely at his office in Manhattan, managing the fallout of my disappearance. My mother was probably at the club, drinking gin and accepting condolences from her tennis partners. The domestic staff had Mondays off. The house was empty. I crept across the patio, keeping low behind the stone balustrades. I reached the service door near the kitchen. I gripped the brass handle and pressed the latch. It clicked open. The caterers hadn't come back for their serving trays yet. I slipped inside, closing the door silently behind me. The kitchen was immaculate, smelling faintly of the lemon polish the cleaning crew used. The silence in the house was absolute, thick and heavy. It felt like a tomb. I moved through the first floor, my wet boots squeaking softly against the imported hardwood floors. I bypassed the grand staircase and took the narrow back stairs, the ones the servants used, up to the second floor. The hallway was lined with oil portraits of my ancestors, stern, unsmiling men who had built the family fortune on steel and railroads. Now, my father was maintaining it with insurance fraud and arson. I reached the heavy mahogany double doors of his study. I pushed them open. The room was exactly as it had been last night. The heavy oak desk, the crystal pitcher sitting on the wet bar, the Persian rug where I had collapsed, still slightly indented where my body had hit the floor. I walked straight to the large oil painting hanging behind the desk, a landscape of the Scottish Highlands. I reached behind the heavy gilt frame and pulled the hidden latch. The painting swung open silently on oiled hinges, revealing the brushed steel face of the wall safe. There was a small digital keypad glowing green in the center. Stellan monitors the keypad. Maya had warned me. If the safe is opened, he gets an alert on his phone. I pulled Imogen's burner phone from my pocket and flipped it open. I dialed her number. She picked up on the first ring. "Are you in?" "I'm looking at the safe," I whispered, keeping my eyes locked on the door to the study. "I'm going to punch the code. You have to be ready. The article is loaded. The metadata files are linked," Imogen said, her voice tight with adrenaline. "Send the picture," and I hit publish. I took a deep breath. I reached out and tapped the numbers on the cold glass of the keypad. 7, 2, 4, 1, 9. The keypad beeped sharply. The light turned from green to a solid pulsing red. The heavy steel bolts inside the door retracted with a loud, mechanical clunk. I pulled the handle, and the safe swung open. Inside, sitting on the bottom shelf, was a stack of thick manila folders. I grabbed them, throwing them onto the top of the oak desk. I flipped the first one open. There it was, the deed for the Astoria tenement. The insurance policy, maxed out to $20 million. The incorporation papers for the LLC, with my name listed as the primary director. But it wasn't a digital signature. It was a physical document. And directly beneath my forged signature was a handwritten note in my father's distinct aggressive cursive. Root payouts through Cayman account 4A. Destroy original after digitizing. A. It was the smoking gun. It proved he saw the documents, directed the funds, and ordered the destruction of the physical evidence. He had just been too arrogant to actually destroy it. I held the burner phone over the document, making sure the lighting caught the blue ink of his handwriting. I snapped a picture. I hit send. "Did you get it?" I asked into the phone. "Downloading," Imogen said. A second later, she let out a sharp breath. "Got it. It's crystal clear, Elena. I have his handwriting." "Publish it," I said, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Publish everything. Uploading now. It's live in 5, 4, 3, 2. It's up, Elena. The Gowanus Standard just dropped a bomb on Wall Street." I let out a shaky breath, feeling the tension finally snap in my chest. We did it. The proof was out there. "Now get out of that house," Imogen ordered. "Stellan got the ping 2 minutes ago." "I'm going," I said. I hung up the phone. I grabbed the folders, intending to take them with me to a federal prosecutor. I shoved them into my coat, turned around, and froze. Standing in the doorway of the study, holding a suppressed 9mm pistol aimed directly at my chest, was Stellan Vance. He didn't look out of breath. He didn't look angry. He just looked like a man who had been inconvenienced by a stubborn spreadsheet. The silencer on the end of the barrel was matte black, absorbing the dim light of the study. "Put them down, Elena," he said. His British accent was perfectly modulated, the kind of voice you expect from a high-end concierge, not a corporate fixer. "It's too late," I told him, gripping the folders so tightly my knuckles ached. "The article is live. The metadata, the forged signatures, all of it. It's on the internet right now." Stellan didn't blink. "Blogs can be taken down. Digital files can be discredited. The only thing that matters in a federal courtroom is the paper in your hands. Put it on the desk." I looked at the gun. I looked at his eyes. He wasn't going to drag me to a van anymore. The parameters had changed. If the story was breaking, my father needed me permanently silenced before I could corroborate it. I didn't put the folders on the desk. I lifted the heavy crystal pitcher that still sat on the wet bar, the same pitcher my father had poured my poisoned water from, and I hurled it directly at Stellan's head. He ducked, raising his left arm to shield his face. The pitcher smashed against the mahogany tiny doorframe, showering him in thick, jagged shards of glass and stale water. I didn't wait for him to recover. I threw my weight against the heavy wooden door that connected the study to my father's private library, slamming it shut behind me and throwing the brass deadbolt. A muted thwip sounded from the study, and a splinter of wood blew out of the doorframe inches from my face. He was shooting through the door. I dropped to the floor, crawling frantically across the expensive Persian runner. The library was a dead end if I stayed in it. It only connected back to the main hallway, which Stellan would already be covering. But there was a small service elevator hidden behind a false bookshelf, installed decades ago for my grandfather, who had used a wheelchair in his final years. I scrambled to my feet, the wet leather boots I had borrowed from Imogen slipping on the polished floorboards. I reached the third shelf down on the section holding the encyclopedias and pulled the brass fixture. The bookshelf swung outward, revealing the dark, cramped box of the elevator. I threw myself inside, slamming the metal accordion grate shut and pressing the button for the basement. The motor whined, a loud, ancient sound that seemed to echo through the entire house. As the car began its slow, agonizing descent, I heard the library door splinter and kick open above me. Elena. Stellan's voice rang out, stripped of its polite veneer. Footsteps pounded across the library floor. I sank to the floor of the elevator, clutching the manila folders to my chest, praying the cables wouldn't snap. The car moved at a crawl. It felt like hours, but it was only seconds before the car hit the basement level with a heavy clunk. I pushed the grate open and stumbled out into the damp, concrete-lined corridor. This was the sublevel. The wine cellar was at the far end of this hall, the same cellar where I had almost frozen to death last night. I didn't look toward the heavy metal door of the cellar. I ran the opposite direction, toward the boiler room and the exterior storm hatch that led out to the back gardens. The basement was poorly lit, the single bulb swinging slightly from the ceiling, casting long, erratic shadows. I hit the boiler room, the massive iron furnace humming loudly in the center. The storm hatch was in the corner, locked from the inside with a rusted iron bar. I grabbed the bar and pulled with all my weight. It didn't budge. The rust had sealed it tight. I heard the heavy thud of footsteps on the wooden stairs leading down to the basement. Stellan hadn't waited for the elevator. He had taken the main stairwell. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my veins. I wrapped both hands around the iron bar and threw my entire body backward. The metal shrieked in protest, flaking rust onto my hands, and the bar slid out of its bracket. I pushed the heavy wooden doors upward, a blast of freezing outside air hitting my face. I scrambled up the concrete steps, emerging into the fading afternoon light of the backyard. The snow was coming down harder now, thick white flakes obscuring the tree line. I didn't stop. I ran toward the woods, my boots sinking deep into the drifts. The trench coat was heavy, dragging me down, but the folders were tucked safely inside my shirt, pressed flat against my ribs. A shot snapped through the air, clipping the branch of a pine tree to my right. He was out of the hatch. I zigzagged, diving behind a massive oak tree. I gasped for air, the cold burning my lungs. I pulled the burner phone from my pocket. Imogen had said to smash it, but I needed to know if the blast radius was expanding. I checked the screen. I had a signal. I opened the browser and typed in the URL for the Gowanus Standard. The page loaded instantly. The headline took up the entire screen, in stark, black font, The Greenwich Inferno, How Arthur Hensley Burned Queens for Profit. Beneath it was the picture I had just taken, the forged signature, the handwritten note. My thumb hovered over the screen. I scrolled down. Imogen hadn't just published the metadata. She had embedded the video clip. The footage of my father ordering me into the freezer was playing on a loop for the entire world to see. My phone vibrated violently in my hand, startling me so badly I almost dropped it. It was a call. Unknown number. I answered it, pressing the plastic against my ear. Elena, a voice said. It wasn't Stellan. It was Arlo. Arlo? Where are you? I'm at the FBI field office in Manhattan, Arlo said, his voice shaking, but laced with a wild, desperate energy. Imogen's article just hit the financial wires. Your dad's company stock is in a freefall. The SEC suspended trading 10 minutes ago. Elena, the DOJ just issued an emergency warrant. They're sending a raid team to Greenwich. They're too late, I whispered, pressing my back against the rough bark of the oak tree. Stellan is here. He has a gun. He's hunting me through the woods behind the house. Stay hidden, Arlo pleaded. The feds are coming in by helicopter. They'll be there in under 10 minutes. Do not let him find you. The line went dead. 10 minutes. In this cold, with a man like Stellan tracking my footprints in the fresh snow, 10 minutes was a lifetime. I looked down at the ground. My tracks were a gaping, obvious trail leading straight from the house to my tree. He didn't even need to look hard. He just had to follow the deep holes in the snow. I couldn't stay here. I shoved the phone back into my pocket and looked around. About 50 yards away, sitting half buried in the snow near the property line, was the old stone well house. It hadn't been used since the estate was hooked up to the municipal water line in the 80s. It was just a small, circular stone structure with a peaked wooden roof and a heavy wooden door. If I could make it there, I could barricade the door. I took a deep breath, tightened my grip on the folders under my coat, and bolted from the tree. My legs felt like lead. The snow dragged at my knees. I kept my head down, waiting for the crack of the gun, waiting for the impact. I hit the door of the well house shoulder first. The wood was rotten and gave way easily, spilling me onto the dirt floor inside. The air in the small circular room was stale and smelled of wet earth and old stone. The center of the floor was dominated by the iron grate covering the old well shaft. I scrambled up, grabbed the broken door, and wedged it back into the frame, shoving a heavy, rusted iron wheelbarrow against it to hold it in place. It wouldn't stop a bullet, but it would slow him down. I backed away from the door, pressing myself into the darkest corner of the well house. I wrapped my arms around my knees, trying to stop the violent shivering that was racking my body. Silence descended over the woods, heavy and suffocating. The snow muffled all sound. I waited. 1 minute, 2 minutes. Then, the soft, distinct crunch of snow outside the door. You're making this very difficult, Elena, Stellan's Someone's voice came through the rotten wood, calm and conversational. I pressed my hand over my mouth to quiet my breathing. The FBI is on their way, I managed to say, my voice trembling. They're flying in. You don't have time to dig me out of here and scrub the scene. If you run now, you might make it to a non-extradition country before they freeze your offshore accounts. A low chuckle came from the other side of the door. My accounts are already frozen, Elena. Arthur's CFO triggered a lockdown the moment the article went live. They burned me, just like they burned you. I am currently an unemployed man standing in the freezing cold. That made my heart stop. If Stellan had nothing left to lose, he had no reason to negotiate. He was just cleaning up a loose end for his own twisted sense of professional pride. Or maybe he thought he could leverage the physical folders to get a plea deal for himself. I have the folders, I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. The ones with his handwriting. You know they're the only physical proof tying him to the fire. If you kill me, they find the folders on my body. If you take the folders, you're caught with the evidence. You have no play here, Stellan. I don't want the folders, Stellan said smoothly. I want you to open the door. No. The silence stretched again. Then, a heavy thud against the wood. The wheelbarrow shifted, the metal legs scraping against the dirt floor. He was kicking the door in. The wheelbarrow screeched another inch across the dirt. I pressed my spine into the cold stone. Folders crushed against my ribs, and counted my own heartbeat instead of his footsteps. Then, rotors, faint at first, just a pressure change in the air. Then unmistakable, the heavy chop of a helicopter cutting low over the tree line. Floodlights swept the snow, turning the cracks in the door to bright white seams. The kicking stopped. Federal agents, hands where I can see them. A dozen voices, boots crashing through the drifts, radios crackling. I didn't move. I didn't trust the silence enough to move. Elena Hensley. A woman's voice now, closer, steady. You're safe. Come on out. I pushed the door open myself. Stellan was already face down in the snow, hands zip-tied behind him, saying nothing at all. I walked out into the floodlights, still clutching the folders, and let someone finally take them from my hands.